Thriving in today's fast-paced world of change and disruption requires innovation. Inside Outside Innovation is the podcast that explores the ins and outs of innovation with raw stories, real insights, and practical advice from the best and brightest in the world of startups and innovation. Each week, we'll bring you the latest ideas in lean startup, design thinking, corporate venture capital, and more. Now, let's get started.
All right, Brian Ardinger, I'm Josh Berry. Backstreet's back in the podcast studio for Inside Outside Innovation. Brian, you just found a phenomenal article.
Yes,
Can you read that title?
So it's in Wired Magazine today. Corporate innovation does not work, says Accenture.
Accenture is a pretty big deal. So 375,000 working in basically every country in the world. They're saying corporate innovation does not work?
Yeah, basically Accenture's Narry Singh, he was at the Wired 2016 forum, came out and said that many corporations are dying right now.
Sure.
And the things that they're throwing against the wall, whether it's accelerator programs or corporate venture, for most of those large firms, is just not making an impact. What do you think about that?
You know, I as a blanket statement saying corporate innovation does not work, I don't buy it. I disregard it. But it comes back to the bigger question, which is what is innovation and what levels of innovation are you actually talking about? If we go back to McKinsey's work, which I don't know if Accenture would like us quoting McKinsey work, but we'd go back to Horizon 1, 2, and 3 levels of innovation as they talk about in the alchemy of growth. And when you're thinking about the further away from the core, the further you get to that Horizon 3 level of innovation, the less likely internal innovation efforts work. Mm-hmm. So in that side, I agree with it. And their hypothesis, or at least what they put forward in the article, is that in place of corporate innovation, you need to do what? What did you see?
Basically, it's collaboration is the key.
Sure.
And it means, again, sussing out and trying to understand what other new innovations are coming from the outside of the marketplace that you can take advantage of and buy at later stages. They use the example of, I think it was General Motors buying
Cruise
for $1 billion, and now they're in the self-driving car market, rather than trying to do that all internally themselves. And that is an excellent example of how you can maybe sometimes leapfrog. Or Guy Kawasaki on stage last night or yesterday was talking about how difficult it is for corporations to jump to that next wave of innovation. If you think, and he was using the example of ice companies back in the day when the ice farm, where the job of the ice farm was to have a cold lake and cut it out and make ice cubes.
Yeah.
And then the refrigerator came along, and the old ice companies couldn't make the jump to the refrigerator, and the refrigerator companies couldn't make the jump to next level, into the refrigerators or whatever the next line of innovation was coming in the ice market. So it's very difficult, and you can industry after industry, whether it's cameras or whatever, it's difficult for existing corporations to jump to that next level of innovation. They oftentimes downplay it or don't realize how disruptive that next line is going to be.
And so one of the difficulties here is that the pace of disruption, the advancements in technology just keep getting faster, right?
Yes.
And so as that continues to get faster and you have corporations who are not moving at that same speed in terms of the change of adopting everything from just better tools and practices and mindsets like lean startup to even just whole organizational structures that really encumber things, right? Compensation and decision-making trees and all of those things that really encumber sometimes innovation. The pace of those things changing is nowhere near at the same trajectory as the pace of technology's advancements. Right. And so I think it's only going to get more and more imperative, and this is where I do agree with the Accenture article, that as we're thinking about that next wave of innovation and really the next jump into of new businesses and new product lines, it probably makes sense to look outside for collaboration on that.
The other thing I think is important to keep in mind is that, nobody really knows what's going to happen. I mean, disruption is disruption by nature. That's definition of disruption is you don't know necessarily what's going to happen. And if you don't know what's going to happen and you're working in this world of unknowns, the chances of you making the right bets internally with the resources that you have to make, 5 shots on goal, 10 shots on goal versus looking outside to 37,000 new startups that have been created in the last year alone, there's more opportunities that one of those 37,000 is going to come out as a outlier versus the 5 that you're working on in your own internal lab.
We had Jitendra from Accenture also. It's an Accenture type of week, I guess, on our podcast that we recorded yesterday. And one of the things that he brought up, which I hadn't even thought about before, is this is almost a corporate play that you can also use other people's money in the development and investment, the innovation process. Because if you think about it, if I've got a couple $1 million to work on this new product, or to your point about spreading risk and looking at 5 to 10 things that are out there, if I can maybe tap into a number of other things that have other investments that are put into them at an earlier stage, again, it may not be the 100% ownership of what I have, but in terms of being able to de-risk something, see a lot of different views at it, and be able to leverage other people's time, money, and talent that have been put into it, it starts to become a really interesting proposition.
Yeah, without a doubt.
So thinking about corporations, it's good to talk about it, like Accenture. It's good to put the things out there. What can companies start to do to actually engage with startups?
Yeah, I mean, some of the mistakes or challenges I've seen from corporations that come to us or others, a lot of it is like, hey, we know we need to be innovative. We have no idea how to do it, so we're going to literally throw everything against the wall. We're going to try a hackathon. We're going to try this. We're going to try that, without having a clear strategy around what you're trying to accomplish. How is that playing into your existing resources, the existing competitive marketplace, et cetera? So I think part of it is, yes, you should do things so you can learn, and you should experiment and kind of learn the lay of the land of how a lot of this stuff works. But at some point, you've got to make a stake in the ground and say, okay, here's how we're going to attack it, or here's what our bets are going to be placed, and be more systematic about how you're going about the idea of innovation in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times when people are saying, oh, they're thinking about startup collaboration, what they're thinking about is M&A or investment, right? And typically what we're talking about is steps before that. It might be something as broad as open innovation, where maybe you might be sharing IP or you might be sharing resources. It might just be figuring out how to start relationships with the startups where you might have services that they could use. It might be something deeper where maybe it's more a strategic channel or other types of partnerships where you have the capital and the clients and the connections that they might like, and they've got the expertise and talent, so you figure out a way. BMW has an interesting idea too, right? Yeah,
so BMW, they have, rather than a traditional accelerator program where they're looking for companies to invest in, they look at companies that go through their accelerator as customers. And the play there is to help them, the startups, quickly navigate becoming a customer with BMW. So they're co-collaborating on that customer's perspective. They're helping them become suppliers to their network and subsequently learning from them in that perspective.
Sure. So if we go back to this idea of I'm a corporation, I've got some opportunities or problems that I want to tackle. Maybe I have internal capabilities that I can put towards those, but maybe I want to experiment with startup collaboration. There's a couple different approaches I can take. Maybe it's just one-to-one. I go out and find 10 to 15 potential startups or entrepreneurs who are working in that area and figure out which one I want to work with.
I think one of the things that corporations kind of underestimate or don't really necessarily, and this is quite frankly where the startups can get a lot of value, is corporations have a lot of problems that they know that are out there in the marketplace. And I work with a lot of startups, obviously as well, in Accelerator, and oftentimes it's like people are working on problems that really aren't problems.
Sure.
But if a startup or a team of talented folks that are entrepreneurial would be more deliberate at understanding what are the core problems that corporations are having in their particular industry, and using that as a way to filter the ideas from the startup perspective, I think they'll have a better chance of actually finding a product market fit in the long term as well. And so from the corporate perspective, doing things like a jumpstart challenge or a reverse pitch where you're saying, here are some industry problems, we want to work with startups. Here's some things that we would like to have solved. We know that there's a marketplace for some of this kind of stuff. And then having smart people and entrepreneurial led people tackle those types of problems, maybe an interesting way to approach it as well.
Absolutely. Those are very much the one-to-one or one-to-many approaches. I've been intrigued lately. Brian, you and I have been batting around this idea of kind of the many corporates to many startups idea, many, M-A-N-Y, in terms of what would it look like if you had a few different corporations who are coming together, maybe even focusing even more on a community focus, to be able to say, look, we're extremely interested in innovation, not only for ourselves, but also for our community. And therefore, maybe there's some common problems we're working on that if we were then to be able to work together on attracting and bringing in startups into our ecosystem, we might be able to increase innovation there as well as to increase our community.
Yeah, and I think that one of the stumbling blocks is potentially like, competitive corporations don't necessarily want to share that glory, but sometimes I think bringing a density of ideas and people and talent, even if you may have to share that conversation, may be better at solving some solutions than trying to do it all by yourself.
Absolutely. So going back to the Accenture article, we agree corporate innovation is really hard. It's sometimes practically impossible if you're just trying to do it internally. Especially, I think they said in the article, for larger, more established, slower-moving companies, you have so much further to go in terms of your transformation. And so rather than jumping on the bandwagon of creating a lab or getting in and doing some lean startup boot camps at the same time, because you do need to grow eventually, maybe you should start to look at the startup collaboration a little bit earlier on.
Right. And again, I think the landscape has changed dramatically over the last 5 to 10 years where when you think about startups in general, the number of startups that are being created, the ability to go out and experiment and build things quickly and fast has never been easier for startups to kind of get up and going.
Yeah.
So the ideas are out there and the opportunities to partner with those folks are probably more than have ever been out there before.
Sure. Absolutely. Cool. We'll look forward to see what responses come to that article, as well as continuing to explore, find, and implement the best practices that we're finding of corporate and startup collaboration.
Yep.
Hey, this might be a good time also, Brian, to plug that we'll be down at South by Southwest
we will be,
next spring. We actually have a panel that we're doing as Econic featuring startup and corporate collaboration.
The next wave of startup and corporate collaboration. It's actually a case study. We're going to be talking about something happened in our own backyard, our own ecosystem with a reverse pitch kind of competition where a corporation stepped up and said, here's one of our core issues that we're struggling with. Startup was formed through that particular process, and we're going to kind of give a live case study in a panel at South by. So excited to be there for that.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, everybody.